Last time, we heard the stories of the first and second dervishes, tales full of adventure, danger, and strange twists of fate. Today, it's the turn of the third dervish. His story is different from the others, but just as full of wonder. Maybe, by telling it, he will finally win his freedom from that house. If you missed the last episodes, it might be a good idea to go back and catch up. Each tale builds on the next, and they all lead here. I am Al-Hakawati, the legendary storyteller, and today we start with the tale of the third dervish. The third dervish stepped forward and began his tale. It was the story of how he lost his beard and why one of his eyes was gone forever. He explained that he had once been a king. He ruled with fairness and his people loved him for it. But even with a crown on his head, his heart was always pulled toward the sea. His city stood by the sea, dotted with islands, and there his fleet was massive, trading ships, pleasure boats, and a whole army of warships at his command. One day he set out for adventure, taking 10 ships across the island. For many days the sea was calm until a fierce storm struck. The sky went black, waves rose high, and the ships were nearly lost. Then, just as suddenly, the storm passed. By morning they drifted near an island, where they rested for 2 days before sailing on. But after more days at sea, the water began pulling their ships in strange directions, and even the captain wasn't sure where they were anymore. So he sent a sailor up the mast to look around. From above, the man saw fish at the surface and a dark shifting shape in the distance. The captain told them that the storm had thrown them off course for 2 days, and after that they had drifted for 11 more with no wind to guide them. By the next morning, he said the waves would carry them toward a terrible place called the Magnetic Mountain. This mountain, he explained, was made of black stone with a strange power that pulled at every piece of iron. Ships could never survive it. Their nails and wood tore apart, and the sea around it was full of wrecks from ships that had been lost. On the shore of that mountain stood a huge dome made of brass. On top of it was a brass horse with a rider, also made of brass, holding a lance. On the rider's chest was a lead tablet covered with strange symbols and names. It is said that as long as the brass rider stayed there, no one could survive. The crew was terrified, and no one slept as the waves carried them toward the mountain. At dawn, the sea hit them with full force. Their ships broke apart, metal ripped off, and men were thrown into the waves, shouting for help. By evening, most had drowned, and the few survivors barely recognized each other. But God kept the dervish alive. He still had trials to face. He grabbed a plank and floated ashore. There was a rough path up the mountain, and he climbed it step by step until finally the wind calmed and he made it to the top. Exhausted but thankful, he prayed and fell asleep under the dome. That night he dreamed a voice calling his name. It told him there was a brass bow and 3 lead arrows right under his feet, covered with talismans. He had to use them to strike the brass rider on the dome. If he did, the rider would fall into the sea. The bow would drop at his feet, and he needed to bury it right there. Then the waters would rise, and a small boat with a brass figure would appear to carry him safely across for 10 days, but only if he stayed completely silent. When he woke, he found the bow and arrows just like the dream had said. He shot the rider, who fell into the sea, and the bow landed at his feet. He buried it quickly, and the waters rose until they reached the top of the mountain. Then, just as the dream had promised, a small boat appeared, gliding toward him. Inside the boat sat a brass figure with a lead tablet on his chest, covered in strange names. The dervish got in without saying a word, and the brass rower rode silently for 10 days straight. Finally, he saw the Isle of Safety. Joy filled him so much he couldn't hold it in, and he praised God aloud, declaring his greatness. But just then, the boat tipped and threw him into the sea. The brass rower disappeared, and the boat was gone. He swam for hours, until he could barely lift himself. Thinking death was near, he recited his prayers and surrendered to God's will. Then a huge wave hit him but threw him safely onto the sand. Exhausted, he squeezed the water out of his clothes and put them back on. Soon he realized he was on a tiny island, surrounded by the sea. He thought, every time I escape one danger, another shows up. He saw a ship coming closer. Hope flickered, but he stayed hidden among the trees. The ship reached the shore, and 10 slaves got out, each carrying a spade. They went to the center of the island and dug until they found a big trap door. They went back and forth, bringing food, supplies, and cloths. Finally, they returned, and with them came an old man, very weak and wearing a worn-out blue robe. Next to him was a young man so beautiful that everyone couldn't take their eyes off him. The slaves brought the old man and the youth down into the hidden chamber. After a while, they came back without the boy, covered the trapdoor, and sailed away. The dervish, curious, climbed down and dug at the fresh earth until he found the trapdoor. He lifted it and went down a stone staircase. At the bottom, the room smelled of herbs and was filled with silks and carpets. The boy was sitting on some cushions, holding a fan, and he went pale when he saw the stranger. The dervish told him not to worry. He explained he was also a mortal, a king's son, sent here by fate. Then he asked the question burning in his mind: how did the boy end up all alone in this hidden place? He waited until the boy's fear faded and then got closer. The boy told him his story. His father was a wealthy merchant who had dreamed the child wouldn't live long. When the boy was born, the father was happy but worried. Scholars and astrologers said the boy would only live 15 years unless some rare event saved him, and that if he survived, he would live longer. They even said that when a brass horseman fell on the magnetic mountain, 50 days later the boy would be killed by the man who shot it. Terrified, the father hid his son deep underground, stocked the chamber with everything he would need, and left him with an old man and helpers. The dervish listened and recognized himself in the tale. He was the man who had shot the rider. He promised himself he would never harm the boy. Then he spoke gently, promising to protect him and only asking that, when it was safe, the boy could be returned to some trusted man to take him home. They settled into a simple routine. The dervish lit lamps, tended the fires, brought food, and even made a checkers board so they could pass the time. Evenings were for quiet talk and games. Nights spent watching over the boy, covering him, and rising at dawn to care for him. Over time, the dervish grew fond of him and rejected the astrologer's dark predictions. He swore he would never harm the child. For 39 days, he stayed by the boy's side. On the 40th night, the boy, grateful and safe, asked only for a warm bath and some simple comforts. The dervish prepared the bath, helped him into fresh clothes, and laid him to rest. The boy asked for a melon, and as the dervish reached for a knife to cut it, fate intervened. He tripped, and the knife struck the boy's chest. The youth died instantly. The dervish felt his world fall apart. He cried out over what he had done. Just one night of danger left. He cursed himself and wished he had never reached for the melon, but he also knew deep down it was God's will. He climbed back up, covered the chamber with earth, and tried to calm himself. Then he saw a ship coming toward the island. He knew the men on board would find out soon what had happened. He climbed up into a tree and waited. Pretty soon, the old man and his helpers came. They went straight to the hidden chamber and saw him, freshly bathed but fatally wounded. The old man screamed, beat his chest, and just collapsed. He didn't even make it. He died right there beside his son. The servants were heartbroken. They put them both on the ship and sailed off, and the ship disappeared from sight. He climbed down from the tree and wandered the island, hopeless and alone. Days went by like this. He searched the shore for food by day, and at night he hid in the underground chamber. A whole month passed. Then he noticed something strange. On the western side of the island, the sea kept shrinking back, lower and lower each day, until finally the water was gone and the seabed lay open. Seeing a chance to escape, he crossed over the shallow ground and reached the mainland. He pushed through the deep sand, every step heavy. Then, far ahead, he saw a strange light. At first, it looked like fire flickering in the distance, and his heart lifted with hope. He kept going, and as he got closer, he realized it wasn't fire at all. It was a great palace, and its gates were made of brass, shining so bright in the sunlight that from far off they had looked like flames. The dervish was overjoyed when he reached the shining palace gates. Not long after, 10 young men came toward him, all of them missing their right eye, and with them was a very old man. They greeted him kindly, listened to his story, and then led him inside. There in the hall were 10 couches, and a smaller one in the middle for the old man. Each took his place, and the dervish was given a seat as well. But before they ate together, the old man warned him not to ask about who they were or how they had lost their eyes. Night after night, the dervish stayed with them, talking and listening, but his mind kept coming back to the same same question. How had all 10 young men lost their right eyes? At last, he couldn't hold back and asked them to tell their story. They warned him that knowing their secret could bring the same fate, but he insisted on them, and finally they agreed. Each had survived an adventure so strange and dangerous that it had cost him an eye, and telling it all would take many long nights. Instead, they gave him instruction to take a ram, wrap himself in its skin, and a mighty bird would carry him to a far mountain. There, a palace where he would finally find the answers. He did as they said, and soon the great bird appeared, lifting him high into the sky. When he stepped out of the skin at the mountaintop, the palace rose before him. When he arrived at the palace, 40 girls, each as bright and kind as the moon, welcomed him warmly. They said they had been expecting him and treated him as their guest of honor. He was amazed. They brought food and drink, arranged flower and fruit around him, and music filled the air. For a while, he was completely caught up in the joy of the moment, forgetting all his troubles. This went on for a year. He spent the time with the girls, and they cared for him, bringing him food and dressing him in fine clothes. A life full of comfort and joy. But when the next year began, the girls grew serious. They explained they were daughters of kings and had a custom. They would leave for 40 days, then return to live in comfort for a year. They gave him the keys to the palace, warning him he could explore 39 rooms freely, but the 40th must stay closed, or he would have to leave. He promised not to open it. After the girls left, he was all alone in the palace. That evening, he decided to explore. The first room had a beautiful garden, full of trees, fruit, and singing birds. The sight and smell lifted his spirit. The next day, he checked another room. Palms, a little stream, and flowers filling the air with their scent. Every room had something new to marvel at. A hall with sparkling stones, birds singing, treasures everywhere. For 39 days, he wandered through the rooms, enjoying it all, but he never touched the one room he was told to leave closed. Finally, with only one day left before the girls came back, curiosity got the better of him. He opened the 40th room. The smell was so strong, it made him faint. When he woke up, the floor was covered in saffron, and the air was rich with incense and perfume. In the center of the room stood a black horse. Curious, he got on the horse. At first, it didn't move, so he struck it with a whip. It neighed, spread its wings, and carried him into the sky. After a while, it set him down on a roof, and its tail hit his face, taking out his right eye. Then the horse flew away, leaving him to climb down. Down below, he ran into 10 one-eyed youths. They refused to welcome him and drove him away. Alone and defeated, he shaved his beard and wandered from place to place. By God's will, he finally reached Baghdad, where he met 2 men just like him, shaved and blind in one eye. They joined together and traveled as dervishes. That's how he ended up in the house of the 3 ladies of Baghdad, and why he looks the way he does, clean shaven with one eye missing. Just then, the women said he could go, but he refused. He wanted to hear the stories of the others first. And so, we have heard the stories of all 3 dervishes, their trials, their losses, and the paths that brought them here. Each tale full of wonder, danger, and the twists of fate that none could have predicted. But their journey isn't over yet. Soon, we will see what happens with the lady of the house and the caliph, and how her story will intertwine with theirs. What do you think? How would you have acted in his place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.